Good morning. When, how, and from whom did you find out that Budapest would be the venue?
I spoke with the American president on the phone last night, but somehow the news had already leaked beforehand. I knew I'd be getting home late, so I told my wife not to wait up. And so, in the evening, I had a longer conversation with the president, and we also spoke with the Russians, and I will be speaking with President Putin this morning before noon. That's how it happened, but I also spoke with the president in Sharm el-Sheikh at the Middle East Peace Summit, and preparations are underway for a Hungarian-American official meeting in Washington. So things are heating up everywhere.
What reasons did Donald Trump give for choosing Budapest, or what reasons do you see behind it?
The American president isn't the kind of person who usually explains his decisions. There weren't really any other options if you think about it. If they wanted to hold it in Europe, there are many places outside Europe where such a meeting could take place. Take Alaska, for example, where the first meeting was held. But if they wanted it in Europe, and the Russia-Ukraine war is, after all, a war taking place in Europe, and you look at the map and the leaders, it quickly becomes clear that Budapest is essentially the only place in Europe today where such a meeting can be held. First of all, because Hungary is almost the only pro-peace country. We're now working with the Slovaks on the peace issue as well, but for 3 years, we've been the only country that has consistently, openly, loudly, and actively stood for peace. Let's not be unfair to the Vatican. I regret that Pope Francis didn't live to see this moment, because when we were attacked most harshly, including at me personally, he was the one who always encouraged us the most to stay steadfast in the good cause. So if you look at the European political map, there's only one country that has consistently and always been pro-peace. I say this with due modesty, but it was the same with the migration issue. Sometimes, when you go against the traffic on the highway, you start to doubt whether you're right. But God sends signs from time to time that, yes, we're on the right track. Look at migration and look at the peace issue. So I think if they wanted it in Europe, it could only be done in the one pro-peace country, and that's Budapest. Plus, there's the advantage that the Hungarian Prime Minister has been in office for a very long time, and I know everyone, and everyone knows me. We've always been loyal partners, always standing by our friends, never changing our word, never giving up any friendship for tactical advantages. This, of course, comes with many disadvantages, but sometimes with advantages too. So if they're looking for a reliable place from a peace perspective, where things will be technically in order, and they won't be caught off guard by political surprises, Budapest seems like a logical choice.
Is there enough time for the preparations, since Trump said the meeting could take place within 2 weeks?
The president told me yesterday that we should prepare for the two foreign ministers to meet on a daily basis. Yesterday, he had a long, and according to his briefing, substantive and successful discussion with the Russian president. They decided that the two foreign ministers would try to resolve the remaining open issues within a week, and then a week after that, they could already be here in Budapest. Last night, or rather, late into the night, I already gave instructions to set up the organizing committee. We've identified the most important tasks, and the work has begun.
You mentioned the attacks Hungary faced for its pro-peace stance, or for even negotiating with figures like Vladimir Putin. In contrast, the first commentaries have already appeared regarding yesterday's announcement, and the Telegraph, for example, writes that this will be a painful blow to the European Union. Could the criticisms and pressure from the EU regarding Hungary's pro-peace stance ease?
First of all, the most important thing is not to lose step, rhythm, or scale. This negotiation isn't about us. Of course, everyone in Hungary is excited because, God knows, when was the last time we had such a significant diplomatic event in Hungary where we're not just hosts, but we're maintaining the conditions for Budapest to be suitable for hosting a peace summit is a political achievement. So I understand that everyone is excited and curious, but I ask for restraint from everyone, because this negotiation isn't about us, it's about peace. The lesson for me is that the 3-year history of our peace struggle or peace fight shows that in politics, many things are necessary, many virtues, skills, and knowledge, but in the big issues, steadfastness and humility are always the most important. You have to stand by the good causes and always consider the cause you serve more important than yourself. If you manage that, and I think we succeeded in the peace issue, if there's steadfastness and humility, things will eventually turn out well, even in the darkest hour. God will set things right or make things right. That's how it was with migration, and that's how it is now. There are still several issues, like family protection, for example. There are still Hungarian positions represented against strong headwinds that we must not give up on. Now, looking at how the EU fits into the picture, well, everyone except us is pro-war. So logically, they've been left out of this summit, but they must not be left out of peace. So I continue to advocate that we Europeans should do the same thing the American president is doing. We should negotiate with the Russians too, not just ride on the coattails of the Americans, not just as the American president's auxiliary team. That's not bad either. Although we're not the American president's auxiliary team yet. Rather, the EU keeps trying to pull President Trump to the pro-war side. But even if we were an auxiliary team, that wouldn't be enough, because Europe should stand up for its own interests and operate its own diplomatic channels, just as Hungary has done, because, from a foreign policy professional perspective, if you look at why this summit is happening here, you could say we were the only European country that, from the beginning, said war is a bad thing. But that doesn't mean we should close diplomatic channels. If there are no diplomatic channels, if we don't keep them open, there will never be peace. So the most important lesson for Europeans is that what we're doing is wrong. The war strategies are misguided. We need peace strategies. We need to help the American president. And alongside that, we need to open an independent European-Russian diplomatic channel.
But in contrast, the European Commission has prepared a defense document stating that by 2030, we must be ready for a war with Russia. Could this sentiment change as early as the next EU summit? And of course, there's a petition in Hungary against Brussels' war plans. What can these signatures achieve in a situation where we see the EU being so determined?
Europe shouldn't be preparing for war, but for peace. And it should have a military force behind peace and a system of military cooperation among European countries, say a collective security system, with which it can defend itself if necessary. The focus shouldn't be on war, but always on peace. What's Europe's biggest problem? The war is its biggest problem. Continuing the war means continuing the problem. The European Union has directly sent 180 billion euros to this war. If we stop and think, that's the number, and if I convert it to forints, there are so many zeros, they wouldn't fit on this table in front of me. So 180 billion euros have been spent, burned in this war, on Christians at the edge of Europe, killing each other. We gave 180 billion euros for that, while the European economy is coughing sick, limping along. That money should have stayed in Europe, and then the European economy wouldn't look the way it does, because the war and its consequences, sanctions and so on, are blocking economic growth. War is always the enemy of economic growth. The European economy has many problems, coming from many roots, but the thickest root is still the one we call war. which blocks Europe's economic growth, including Hungary's. Our growth rate would automatically double or triple if there were no war. And this war can only be stopped with peace. If we continue the war, it will consume even more money and will be in an even worse economic situation. That's why I feel it's worth the cost and the inconvenience that Budapest residents will have to endure. And I respectfully ask them to bear it during the summit. This is worth it for Hungary because we can't make as much money on anything as we can on peace. Because war takes our money. If there's peace, a new phase of economic growth can be opened, and that's in the interest of every Hungarian family, even those who have never read or heard a single sentence about foreign policy. So today, it's in the interest of every Hungarian family that the Trump-Putin presidential meeting in Budapest brings peace.
But to what extent would this override the European Commission's plans? Or how much can a petition shape this?
I suggest, and I think, that if there's an agreement on peace, the European war plans need to be thrown out the window. Everything needs to be recalibrated. We'll need a European security and military development plan, but not because we're at war with the Russians, but because experience shows that peace always needs some kind of military capability behind it. That's missing in Europe today. We're far more dependent on the Americans than we should be. More precisely, it's almost certain that our nuclear capabilities won't match the Americans. We don't need to develop our nuclear capabilities, but our conventional weaponry capabilities to a state where we feel secure. On Europe's eastern edge, if any conflict breaks out anywhere, anytime, the question should never arise whether we can defend ourselves if the Eastern Front moves west. We need to show strength because peace requires strength. So we need defense industry and military development programs, but they shouldn't be at the forefront of our strategy. Peace and restarting economic growth should be at the forefront. So the EU needs to create a peace plan, throw out the war plan, and create a peace plan with a security component. That's what I hope for, and then things will fall into place. Although in politics, it's rare to see the virtue, or I rarely see a situation where 24 politicians advocating a war strategy simultaneously say, well, we chose the wrong direction, let's turn the other way because that's the way forward. But let's not rule it out. If the Middle East peace could happen, if the hostages could go home, if there's a Trump-Putin presidential meeting in Budapest, why couldn't we believe that Europeans will also come to their senses?
Let's talk about economic issues, domestic economic issues, because there's a debate about the tax system and taxation issues, in which pensioners have also been dragged in recently, and we'll talk about that separately. Because of this, the government launched a national consultation on taxation and energy issues. But if the difference between the two sides' positions is clear, at least on this issue, then what's expected from the consultation? Why is the consultation necessary from this perspective?
There's a classic debate happening in Hungary right now. It's been a long time since we've had such a debate. I'd call it a classic left-right debate. By 2010, the left and its economic policy had bankrupted Hungary. That's when we came in with a two-thirds majority and launched a right-wing, national, civic, Christian economic policy where peace didn't yet seem like such an important part. Back then, it was about full employment, creating 1 million jobs, tax reduction, a work-based economy, and family protection. And for the last 15 years, we've essentially carried this out without intellectual challenge. Of course, there were elections, there was pushing and shoving, struggles, even sharp and sometimes painful struggles, but this kind of debate, where a country always has two economic policy options, a left-wing and a right-wing one, hasn't appeared as clearly as it does now. Now it has appeared. So after 15 years, there's again an intellectual debate about the future of the Hungarian economy, and the left has reformulated itself through the mouths of the old players behind the Tisza party. and there's a government pursuing its right-wing economic policy. The essence of left-wing economic policy is always tax increases, the belief that you need to take money from people and redistribute it according to the state's logic, which will supposedly lead to a more successful economy and a fairer world. In contrast, the right-wing view is to leave as much money as possible with people. There are state services that need to be financed. Take the money needed for those, but it's best to leave the money with people and businesses, because they always know how to use it better and more efficiently than the state would. So these two ways of thinking are becoming increasingly distinct day by day. And Tisza and DK are pushing the classic left-wing economic policy, now wanting to tax pensions, because left-wing economic policy is always about raising taxes while we're implementing tax cuts. So one side is giving Hungarians a cold shower, pension taxes. The latest being raising the corporate tax from 9% to 25%, replacing the flat income tax with a multi-tiered tax, meaning an income tax hike. On the other side, the right is running Europe's largest tax reduction program. I think the best tool to settle this debate is a national consultation.